Y'all, there's like a billion new spells coming in this update. Today, I'm going to be making a full-blown tier list of every single spell fusion new spell that came out this update. There are 42 of these. That is right. That's how many new spells there are just for combining two spells that you've already seen for like years. And I think some of these are actually really game-changing. I want to break down all my rationale. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting right off with a big, bad lightning dragon. Gotta put this one on S tier. I think the spell works for multiple reasons. The context of the spell is it combines Fire Dragon and Triton to make a new heal counter for fire. And what I love about that is that fire's weak against healing. This addresses it, and it's two cards that you would normally pack in PvP. Right, Fire Dragon, you would pack it as a trap counter. Triton, you would already pack it as a heal count. But they're gonna change Triton. It doesn't give Fire Blades like it does in Live Realm right now. It's gonna give Storm Blades. So for that reason alone, being able to turn heals into overtimes that you can leverage on a fire is great, and the 900 damage that you do is explosive compared to the Triton damage. Oh, the little, I forgot what it's even called, the little death bird looking at. Oh, I hate to do this because it's actually a really good spell, but very unfortunately, I'm gonna have to put the C tier. Now, hear me out. This is yet another fire weaving card. The two parts to spell fusion, we're looking at Sunbird and Sprite. I actually think if you do shield, Sprite can turn those shields into weaknesses on your opponent. That's actually a pretty cool mechanic. The problem is, I don't think a lot of people are gonna pack Sunbird. Sunbird is a spell that does extra damage if you have an OT on. And what this card seems to be doing is, if the enemy has an OT, you combine it with Sunbird, and then you make them have weaknesses as a result. I feel like you're almost better off if you have an OT on your opponent and you have a Sunbird in hand just to cast the goddamn Sunbird. That's kind of the problem here. I feel like they're both conditionals if you have an OT on your opponent. And the fact that you have to spell fuse, the damage isn't really that crazy even for 3 pip. This could make an appearance though, especially if instead of going into Storm for heal countering, Fire goes into Death. Very possible you could use Skeletal Pirate instead of Triton and still do a lot if you run Death Pierce and all of that. This could be B tier. It is definitely not A tier. I'll say that much. Damn, we got a lot of fire spells. Oh, this one's kind of sickums. I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna put this B tier, y'all. This is a card that clears 3 blades. And I want to say that for each blade that you clear, you get an overtime on your opponent that lasts 3 turns. If y'all don't know, Fire Scion is a spell that does extra damage when you have 3 OTs on. And currently, Fire doesn't have a real way of dealing with triple blades other than literally enfeebling. That's the only option that you have. I think if going into Ice helped Fire deal with heals, which is like a very inbuilt weakness, then this would be high. Actually, you know, because you're giving up heal counters, I might have to put this below the bird. That's sad, but I might have to. That feels wrong. You know what? The homie deserves it. Listen, I know. The subject to change as the tier list goes on. Moving right along, this is yet another fire fusion spell that you can get for combining a Elephant and a Forest Lord. I'm gonna put this at the bottom of the goddamn thing. I don't really get what this is even supposed to do. Apparently, from what I can understand, if you have 2 blades on as a fire, you would use this to turn the 2 blades into 2 overtimes and then do some life damage. It doesn't even clear a shield or anything. I feel like if you're gonna blade as a fire, you might as well use those blades for damage. I don't know what they were thinking with this. Complete garbage. Would never use this. Oh my god, y'all. We got a non-fire spell. I'll be honest, this is a balance fusion. These seem to be a little weak because none of them clear anything. It's always based on not clearing. Now, you get this spell for combining Locust Swarm and Evil Snowman, which, in my opinion, if I were on a balance, which is what would be using this, right? This is like a balance weaving into Ice. I could see myself carrying both for sure. So that part actually does put it up. And you know what? If someone 3-folds you and you did this to break a shield and put some traps on, I could see this being decent. I feel like balance doesn't actually get that many options. This one's not actually terrible. I feel like you could use the snowman in your hand to clear weaknesses, or you could also use it for offense. So actually, I like the versatility of this a lot, actually. Another balance weaving spell. This one's ridiculous, y'all. This is one of the ones that got teased. This, you can combine it with Zilla. So you have Locust Swarm still as a starting thing. But if you combine it with Zilla, you get 480 damage for 3 pips as a balance. And you also get a 55 trap if you have an overtime on yourself. Like if the balance has an overtime. Again, I think Locust Swarm is actually a pretty good spell. I feel like people will still use it. I want to say it got changed into something that people would still use in test roll. I'm not sure it's a trap counter anymore, but it is, from what I can remember, it's good. I think based on the fact that I could easily see myself carrying Locust, carrying Zilla, having the option of clearing OTs or putting traps if it's like a single OT, pretty cool. I think this might be good, especially if you choose to use a heal countering Gearhead, because they're changing it so it doesn't counter both dots and hots. If you have the heal countering Gearhead, maybe this would be a good way to pad your, you know, anti-dot stuff. God, what am I looking at, man? This is another see, this is what I'm talking about, bro. Like, if you're a balance weaving into stuff, what is this, bro? Like, at face value, it looks like it could be OP. The problem is, right, this is clearly, in my opinion, a PvE spell, because you're not going to carry Seraph or Sandstorm as a balance at all. And if y'all are wondering what the conditional is, you could do extra damage if your opponent has a damage OT on them and you have a heal on yourself. If this was either or, and maybe you could add double the damage for having both, this would be a very, very cool spell. I think for PvE as a balance, having a 6 pip AoE isn't actually terrible, so I'll put it up. I think this could be, like, worse. I just think you're almost always better off waiting the extra round and just literally using a Nova instead of this. So I'm a little iffy on this. Another balance weaving spell. This combines Scarab, which is a much better spell in test realm. It can swap blades or weaknesses depending on which spellman path you go into, but it combines it with Banshee. I'm not a big fan of Banshee because I would argue that if you want blade countering spells as a balance, you're gonna want better ones than a double clear like Banshee. And what the spell does when you combine the two, right? You have to have both Scarab and Banshee. You combine the two, you do a decent bit of damage. You get a 35 chromatic weakness, meaning it's a school specific weakness per blade on your opponent, but you don't clear them. The fact that you don't clear them is crazy to me, bro. I think you're almost, this might be at the bottom, because think about it. You're better off swapping a blade with a Scarab. You're probably almost better off clearing the blade with Banshee. This is just stupid because it doesn't clear the blade. What if they use an anti-weakness on you? You're toast. This is garbage. Oh, this one's interesting, y'all. So what the Myth Elf does, you combine Elf and Stone Nussie, that's right, Stone Colossus on a fire. You get a triple weakness clear that can turn those weaknesses into a fire dot, and the base spell for a simple 4 pips is a double OT that does 700 damage. For context, right? Let's say that you don't have weaknesses on you. This is already a double OT for 700 damage. That is better than anything that you can currently do on a fire. I think this is better than the Swarm, like 1,000,000,000% better. I think if you could run Myth Pierce and damage, Stone Colossus is a great card to have as a weakness clear on a fire. My only issue is, once again, just like the previous fire weaving things, by weaving into Myth, you're gonna lose a lot of damage output and utilities related to anti-healing. I could see this just being a way to overwhelm your opponent with overtimes though. So it is up there because I think this could be really good simply for the pips and the overall usefulness of the components of the fusion formula. Oh god, y'all. Yeah, this is another, wow, wait, so this is the exact same fusion formula as a Scarab, the Death Scarab, except now it's for Death weaving into balance. This is clearly trash, because if you had a Banshee as a Death, you could just turn blades into like 50 weeks. So instead, this is saying that per blade you have on your opponent, you can give them a 70 infection, whatever, but you can get rid of the blades and get infections with a regular Banshee. This is easily the worst one we've seen. Oh, y'all, this one, I've heard some big things. This is if you're an ice weaving into fire, if you have Snowman and Elf, which are, again, very easy cards to justify packing on like, these are low pip cards. But if you combine them, you can make weaknesses into overtime, and you also get a base triple overtime on an ice that does 1,000 damage for 6 pip. If you run Fire Pierce, fire damage, and all that on an ice, this could be a ridiculous ass move, and you never have to worry about weaknesses. I would put this at S tier. However, you already have very punishing weakness clears already. This doesn't add any utilities to being an ice. Definitely interesting. Will people go into adding utilities on an ice or pure offense against shields by going into fire? Time will tell. This is a good spell in my opinion. Oh, the Daddy Leviathan. If you were Storm weaving into life, you can make a Leviathan and a Centaur and just a 4 pip spell. I'm gonna put this at S tier, y'all. I think Centaur, I don't really see myself using it that much, but if you can turn a Centaur and a Leviathan into a very, very cheap trap clear. That's a new utility. Very often there are some matchups where, like with Brimstone and single myth traps, where a cheap trap clear is very, very good. This would be a goated spell if Leprechaun was what you needed to combine with the Leviathan, because you could already carry Leviathan just to have a hit or a dot counter on a storm. That's amazing. If the trap counter came from Leprechaun instead of Centaur, that would be amazing, because you could always use Leprechaun against single and double traps. But this, I feel like this is extremely good the second you have more than one trap. It's good though. I think it's a new utility. Are you going to get that much extra damage by weaving into another school on a storm? Probably not, so the focus will be on utility. Moving on to Grimzilla. This is the first spell fusion spell that they ever teased. You can combine Zilla with Ghoul. This is something that's intended to be used as a storm. Now, unlike the previous spell where Storm weaved into life, this one, I don't really see it being that useful. I do love the damage output. This is extremely high damage, even for a storm. However, am I going to be using shields regularly on a storm? Probably not at all. If you were to, I could see this being useful, because sometimes you end up having to, like, if you have a defensive setup, you might shield a lot and you never use those shields as a storm. So that is a new utility. I don't think it's that good, but Zilla is a spell that I would carry. I could easily justify adding Ghoul if it means that I could turn my shields into something actually usable. Could be good. I'm not that convinced. It's lower than Cryocat for sure. Oh my god, what is this? What, so if you're a storm weaving into balance, you got this? I didn't even know this existed, y'all. So yeah, this is gonna be a bad one, because see, this requires you carry both Lord and Gearhead on a storm. The problem is you don't need to carry Gearhead on a storm, because Gearhead deals with dots and hots, and Storm naturally counters both. That's the only school that can do that. You're not gaining anything by doing this. You're gonna clutter your deck. I don't even think Stormlord is that good anyway. Looks like we're seeing some myth spells now. So this is if you're a myth going into fire, and it's a trap gambit. In case you guys are unfamiliar with gambits are, it's when you give up stuff that's actually could be useful to you to get another effect. This one gambits traps that you already have on your opponent. Is this good? Honestly, myth and fire have a lot of synergy. However, I don't think this one's that good. Hellephant is kind of stupid because drop air is so much better on a myth if you're trying to hit through shield. That's already one part of the spell fusion that's bad. And Medusa, I've actually used Medusa. The way that it works is it turns traps that you already have on your opponent into more powerful traps. So that actually could make sense if you're doing a trap heavy strategy. However, I think traps tend to conflict with OTs. So I'm actually going to put this much lower than I would like to. I think you could really run into an issue where you have myth traps on your opponent, a good bit of damage, obviously, for 4 pips, right? You'll do a lot of fire damage, but then you're going to give up your myth traps for myth overtimes that might just use up the remaining myth traps. I think that's a little silly. If it was maybe 3 overtimes, then you could say, oh, you're setting up an overtime gambit, but 2 overtimes, just not worth it. Now, on the flip side, if you go into Storm as a myth, you have another trap gambit, but this one turns your traps into blades. Blades, way more compatible, in my opinion. I also really like that the component that you're getting is Triton, which is really cool because you're going to use Triton against Life Wizards. However, you're not going to use traps against them. So let's say that you go against not a life, then you could actually use the Triton still. If you go against a life, you're going to discard the Medusi and you're just going to keep the Triton for a heal counter. This is up there, y'all. Very powerful blade, very high damage. You keep your anti-OT utility as well if you want to pack like Leviathans. This is like, I think this is up. You know what? I'll put that up there. This is actually, I didn't realize how good this was. 4 pips, 640 damage. You might actually use traps for blades. And the components are stuff that I could easily justify using. It is up there. Maybe the best school to weave into for myth. Speaking of not such a good school to weave into myth, this is a spell that you get for weaving into life. It's just like Nature's Rats for life, where if you have OTs on your opponent, damage OTs, you get blade. What I hate about this is I would never really pack Nature's Rat and heal on a myth. Right? If I were to, like, be able to use Nature's Rat, that gives you, like, a guiding light for having an overtime and a damage blade. But I'm not going to heal, really, on a myth. I think that's, like, very hard to even pull off. So, I guess it's around Grimzilla, because you're not going to shield as much on a storm. You're not going to use Nature's Rat, really. Yeah, it's kind of sad to put it down there. I think it's worse than weaving into fire. Oh, this one's hot. This one's hot. So, there's another myth weaving spell. You get this for weaving into ice. Very, very high damage 6-pip spell. You might actually consider using Minnow and Wyvern. That Minnow would be a shield counter that turns shields into traps. Wyvern is a blade counter that turns blades into traps, right? That's some synergy there. You can turn multiple things into traps and gambit them for other things. My only issue is by going into this, you give up a lot of utilities that you need. You don't have anti-heals. You don't have anti-damage overtimes as an ice, especially if you're a myth going into ice. That does make this worse. Because if I went into Storm, I'd be chilling. I do think it's, oh, but it's like a Frost Giant with Myth Traps. That's like ridiculous. That's like an auto win against Myth Mirrors. Guys, I think I gotta put that up there for the meta. If someone like Sunblades and double Myth Blades against you and you use this, you just win on the spot, bro. And the damage isn't bad. I guess the anti-blade stuff is good. I still think I'm probably leaning more towards Storm as a myth than Ice as a myth. And now there's the goated Death Frog. Now this is a heal counter on a myth. Just like Fire, myth is bad against heal. Now the Skeletal Pirate isn't bad in the Spell Fusion formula. The Frog, I kind of hate that. You're just not going to carry Frog, so I gotta dock points for that. And the other problem is, if you're really countering a life, you don't want to turn their heals into traps. They can counter the trap. I mean, it's not terrible. I might put it B tier. I think it's at the top of B tier. Like, I would never, Frog doesn't have a utility added onto it. And it's like, if I'm gonna use a 5-pip heal counter, I might as well just use the Pirate. Sand Troll might be one of the nicest looking spells. Now, this is kind of weird because this is if you're a myth going into balance. So is a myth gonna carry Scarab? Is a myth gonna use Troll? Maybe Troll, but probably not Scarab. I'm gonna have to put this down, y'all. It detonates overtimes for having weaknesses on yourself, but as a myth, you're going to use those weaknesses to Stone Colossus and do damage. This doesn't really make sense to use. It strengthens a part of your identity that's already stronger than what the card does. So it's down there with a lot of the other balance spells. A lot of these are a little dookie. Oh, this one's goated. So let's say that you're a life going into Fire. You get a shield clear for carrying Nature's Wrath, which is something a life will carry, and Elephant, which is a great shield counter that people already carry. And what this spell does, it does a double OT. It also clears up to 3 shields for 3 blades. You would do this against someone that's shield gambiting. I would argue the best school to use this against is Myth, right? You'll be doing a lot of damage, and you're also going to be, you know, getting some overtime identity, and you're going to be getting some blades that Myth isn't good against. For life, I think shields are a really, really big problem. So I'm going to put this A tier. I think this is something that a lot of synergy with Fire and Life as well. They overlap with Dots and Hot, so I could see this just being something you could just do to open up a lot of options. Shield countering is good. Now, here is the goated ass spell. So this is basically what you get if you're an ice going into Storm. I've already kind of talked about this spell because I think it's easily one of my favorites. You'd have to carry Zilla, which is a dot counter, and you'd have to carry Wyvern, which everybody carries on an ice. So these are very easy things to justify carrying. But what you get is an extremely powerful dot counter that clears 2 dots and turns each one into a 30 trap on your opponent. Right now, if you go against a Fire or anyone spamming dots, you have to use a Life King art as an ice. That's like the only really good counter that you get. It's decent. Is it as good as this? I don't think so. And what I like about weaving in a Storm, just like the previous things, is you get heal counters anyways, right? You could pack Storm King art. I want to say that's a heal counter. You could carry Triton just to have it. This is up there, y'all. Is it better? I think it's definitely better than Life Leviathan, because a dot clear on an ice is just so good. It addresses an inbuilt ice weakness. And these are easy cards to pack. I think this has to be better than this. I think some of these spells that are incoming, they're about to be a little bit dookie. This is what you get for being a life going into ice. You can basically use excess blades for defense instead of offense, which is what life does. It's not terrible. It adds an option. I don't mind it. It's not utterly useless. It is definitely worse than other spells that we've seen. Oh my god, what is... I have not seen this. What is this? If you're a life going into Storm, it's a 5-pip spell that does 800 damage and turns your blades into weaknesses, bro. Yeah, this is clearly way better if you're gonna carry Lord. I don't think you would carry Lightning Bats as a life, though, because you already have good damage overtime clears, and that's what Lightning Bats is. Honestly, not bad. It's not as good as a shield clear for life, I'll say that. I'd say it's right here. Yeah, some of these spell fusion things for damage alone, you could justify it. It's just a really high source of damage at 5 pips. This might be... I'll put this here. Maybe there. I don't think that's as bad. I might actually consider using this for a video. Now, this spell is the one that I think is ridiculous. This one is just like Fire. For going into Myth, life gets a shield clear, but it's 5 shield clears for 6 pips, 700 damage. You can get 5 blades out of this. 5 blades versus 3, way better. This is easily S tier. I think it's right there. I'm surprised at how good Storm and Dusty is. This is a very good spell. You just don't have to worry about shield gambits with this. The only issue with the spell is if a death is shield spamming against you and you get that many blades, they could turn those blades into a madness if you time it wrong. That's the big problem. However, against a myth, you could use their myth bubble against them. You could be like ridiculous. I feel like the way a lot of Life Wizards played, this would be just an easy spell. Centaur and Minnow were very easy to justify packing as well. Another life spell, Life Weaving into Death. There's a trap clear for weaknesses. I've already talked about this. You already get trap clears as a life. So I think turning traps into school-specific weaknesses, it's cool. I'm going to put it right there. I think it's a new utility, which is good, because I feel like the weaknesses could be very dope. It's a little bit cheaper than Centaur, which I like as well. I think it's really held back by needing Leprechaun and Banshee. I would rather carry Scarecrow and Centaur if I want blade and trap counters. Those just cover more blades and traps. Chat, what is this, man? If you're a life going into balance, it's a balanced one, man. I feel like these aren't good. Look at this garbage. It does a little bit of damage, and then per trap that you have on yourself, it does some overtimes. This is cool because if you have 4 traps, it can create 4 overtimes. So the damage output could be ridiculous. I just think, would you want another trap utility as a life when you can just clear them and turn them into stuff? I would argue it's better than most of the balanced ones. I think it's D tier. Maybe low C. I'll put it low C tier. Ooh, we're getting Death Weaving into Fire. Now, what I love about the spell already, 1, you are already gonna carry Skeletal Dragon because it's an extremely good blade counter. If you're worried about shields, you will carry Elephant as well. What this does for just 4 pips, does 500 damage, clears 3 shields, turns them into death blades as a death. This is an extremely powerful utility in my opinion. The issue with the spell, you give up dot clears by not going into Storm or Life, which is a serious problem. I'm gonna put this S tier because of both parts of the spell fusion I could easily justify doing. I think it's here. I think if you do this, you're not going to lose against shield gambits as easily. And that is a really hard thing to beat if you're a death versus myth, for example. I'm liking all these death spells. So this is a weird one. You can combine Red Ghost, which obviously you're going to carry, with Kraken, which that I don't think you're going to carry as a death weaving into Storm. And you can turn traps on your opponent into a really powerful like damage aura, as in it increases their incoming death damage by 50%. I think what this is supposed to be, right, for each weakness you gambit, you get 2 rounds of harmful aura. So you could actually make this into like a 6-round harmful aura for having weaknesses on your opponent, and the damage is really good. This is going to be surprising to people. I'm going to put this very high up because I would prefer to have dot clears than shield clears. So I think it's better than the Fire Dragon. I also do think that this card looks so good to me. I think harmful auras are going to be a really good tool. I could easily justify packing Zilla and Leviathan and other things like that while running this. You're gonna have a weakness against shields. You could break shields with other things, in my opinion. I think this is a really good card. I think it's gonna be underrated. I think a lot of people won't agree with S tier on this. I'm putting it S tier. Now, this is a spell that you get for combining Red Ghost with Beetle. Well, again, one thing that I will say about this, giving up Red Ghost is kind of crazy because you're giving up a hidden bubble for a spell fusion. This is also an extremely good card, though. I can't hate on it. I just think that you already countered blades as a death, so having additional blade countering stuff by going into ice isn't particularly useful. For 7 pips, the damage is decent. Gambiting your shields for 50 traps could be good, but I feel like there's better utilities out there. I'm gonna say it's like a very mid spell. I actually think you could use this. I don't think it's bad. I just think Beetle's kind of a weird thing to pack. That turns your shields into more powerful shields, which is kind of like, you know, repetitive. Yo, the myth vampire. I need to see what the animation for this looks like, bro. There will be a video on that coming soon. But this spell is what you get for going into myth as a death. And it's a drain, but it's a myth drain. Really cool, just off the bat. It's very unique. Now, Vampire is a spell. If you do Death PP, you know you're gonna use this. And Bloodbat, I mean, you could use it. It turns your shields into a chromatic trap, and you are gonna shield. It's up there, y'all. And you do get, what, anti-weakness stuff for going into myth? I feel like the actual fusion formula is great. And you'll get anti-shield stuff as well. I'm gonna put this at the top of A tier, because not only are you getting a very good fusion formula with this, you're also going into myth. You could theoretically go into myth, have a ton of myth damage, and run shield counters as well. Are you gonna have dot clears? No. I think that's the really big issue with any school that doesn't naturally clear dots. They're just very, very powerful if you go against a fire or a myth that's dot heavy. This one's a surprise ass late entry, but I think it's pretty decent. So this is if you're going into life as a death, and it's a triple trap clear that turns those traps into weaknesses. This is a very powerful utility. You are weak against traps as a death. And what I also like about going into life is you can get those dot clears that you're missing by being a death. I also feel like the accuracy burden of going into life is so low that maybe it's easier to go into fire or myth as well, just to have some sort of answer to shield. I think this is actually up there with storm. I really do. I think going into storm, it's up there. It might be, I don't think it's as good. I'll say that. I think Leviathan is a goated overtime clear. I would rather go into storm for that alone than life for like Earthwalker or Life King. It could be interesting to see how this works though, because I do think having the ability to clear traps for weaknesses makes you way better against people that want to like PvE you or one-shot you. So it is up there for sure. It's a very good spell. Keep in mind you would need Banshee in your deck, which a lot of people use Skeletal Dragon as a blade counter on their death. Now this one's weird. You get this for using both Colossus and Stone Colossus in a fusion formula, and you can basically do myth damage while clearing weaknesses for ice traps. This is something that an ice would use. They already have really good weakness counters. I don't think this does anything revolutionary for them. I think you lose out on a lot by going into myth instead of other schools. I'm gonna put this like smack dab in the middle of C tier. I'm almost certain that you are better off literally doing any other school than myth though, because the overlap of that weakness clear is awful. You're not gaining anything by doing this. Now Fire Scorpion, it looks dope. It's what you get for being a balance going into fire. Now this one might be one of the best ones for specifically for balance. Keep in mind, mana burn is going to be no PvP. What does that mean? That means that you are going to have to be able to deal with high pip hits. Best high pip hits in the game are shield gambits, and what this card does is, right, per shield on your opponent, you can do damage and get up to 3 heals. It's very easy after 1 triple shield to actually have the ability to punish that. What I like about this is, if you were to dual school at all right now on a goddamn balance, the one thing that you would do is acknowledge that not having mana burn makes you bad against shield gambits and go into fire. I think Scorpion's a great spell, specifically because it can tackle shields and swap them and all that. Phoenix is weird, but I could, maybe, you know, you could see yourself using it. I don't know. But I think, let's say that I were to go into fire and I were to go for, you know, getting 3 heals, it could be a very easy way to set up something that I could go into fire specifically to use. Rain of Fire, Inferno Load. And since balance can buff up off-school spells, out of all the things that we've seen for balance, I think this is easily up there. I think it is probably worse than Life Banshee. Oh, it's worse than that too. I think it's there, y'all. I think it's one of the best shield counters on here, because I think if you go into fire as like a goddamn balance, you get anti-traps, you get anti-shields. I'm gonna say this. I think there are ways to deal with heals and dots as a balance without storm utilities. And for that reason alone, I think Fire Scorpion is better than Storm, Lightning, Swarm thing. Oh, this is crazy, y'all. You have to use Nova and Minnow, which are both things that you can do against shields. And this is like a balance spell. It does a good bit of damage and gives you 1 trap per shield on your opponent for up to 5 traps. And they look universal. The damage isn't terrible. I just feel like if you are gonna do this spell, then it's only because shields are very, very good. So it's not going to be anywhere close to as good as Scorpion. You're not getting heals for it. You're getting traps that could get countered easily by shielding school. It's weird though. I think balance has so few options that it has to be up on this tier list. I think I'd put it like there. I don't think it's amazing. I think Fire Scorpion hits it out of the park. But I guess if you were to go into myth, you get anti-weaknesses. So yeah, if weaknesses are more prominent in the meta than traps, maybe going into myth for balance is better than going into fire. Y'all, this one is surprisingly good. So this is if you're an ice going into life, you get a trap clear, which is not something you currently have access to. I'd put this a lot higher if I thought that 1, traps were prevalent, or if ice really desperately needed a trap counter. I feel you could deal with auras, bubbles, and blades really well on an ice. So at that point, traps aren't really a big deal. And if someone were to go into traps or whatever, you could always just, you know, yeet them with like, you know, a Sun Serpent. You could always just do that just to have it. So I feel like it's pretty useless, to be very honest. It's a cool utility. I just think you need other things as an ice. Speaking of other things, we're looking at a 7 pip triple heal clear for an ice going into death carrying Woolly and Skeletal Pirate, which are easily some of the best cards that you would pack going into death. Guys, I don't know if ice can compete with healing, but if it could, it's because of the decision to go into death and using this spell fusion formula. This is probably one of the most game-changing spell fusion formulas in the game right now. It's up there. I think it's right there. I mean, it's better than Joltergeist, because a heal counter that you can actually rely on an ice, probably one of the best things. Extremely high damage for ice as well. Keep in mind, you'll have Death Pierce, you'll have death damage. This is going to be a ridiculous spell that can actually deal with rebirth for less pips than the rebirth is worth. You are, however, giving up dot clears by going into this. If you go into Storm, you get a really cool dot clear, and you can always pack Triton. That being said, I think if you just brace some weakness, you might be able to deal with dots. You might just pack Life King Art anyways as a dot clear. So this might still be better. Now, this spell is a little weird because it's only 2 pips. And it's actually pretty decent. So this is if you're an ice going into balance. You get a 2-pip hit that gives you a 40 trap per blade on your opponent. Once again, if you have a blade on your opponent as an ice, you're going to want to clear it, turn it into traps, turn it into something. It's down here, bro. I don't know between going into balance, between these 4, which one's better. It's just, this is just ass. I don't think it's worth it. Ooh, a late entry, but it's some heat. This if you were a Storm going into fire. Now, hear me out. If you go into Storm as a fire, you get these double Pierce tools that let you do ridiculous damage with Fire Elf and Elephant. Now, in my opinion, I think that alone makes weaving into fire as a Storm good, just because shields are good. If you, as a Storm that's offensive, you're gonna see a lot of shields. I'm gonna put this way up, y'all. I think the actual spell isn't amazing, but if you do have weaknesses on your opponent, you actually do get an extremely powerful Storm overtime. That's also a damage overtime. The reason I'm putting the spell fusion formula up, though, which might be breaking the rules of this tier list, I think by going into fire, you have so many options. Speaking of Storm, I've heard a lot of people say that they would go into Mint if they had the option. Now, going into Mint does not give you a cheap shield clear like Fire Elf, which is why I don't think it's as good as going into fire, but this is a very cool utility. You do have to carry Sirens, which not a lot of people are going to carry. It's very high pips and only probably useful for this, but by combining a Sirens and a Stone Colossus, you can clear up to 5 weaknesses, which could actually make the death matchup winnable. The issue is you turn those weaknesses into blades, which death can also counter. The damage is pretty goddamn low for a Mint. Is this a good spell? Sure. I would say it's like really high up, A tier. I just don't really see someone doing so many weaknesses on you without being able to have an answer to the blades that you're gonna make out of them, and the damage is just not that worth. And it's a fusion formula, so you gotta, like, you know, you gotta have Stone Colossus and Sirens. I think it's actually an inconvenient spell. If you ask me, weaving into Mint is worse on a Storm than weaving into fire, and weaving into ice is even worse. This is an awful fusion formula. You basically get the same dot clear identity that you already have on a Storm, but you're turning them into shields, which is ridiculously weak. I'm actually going to put this below the balance ones. If you use this, you're garbage at the gate. And finally, a surprisingly good weave into balance. I would argue if any school were weaving a balance, it might be fire. You are going to probably carry Elephant. Scorpion isn't like a crazy thing to pack. And what I like about this is it gives you 3 OTs if your opponent has 3 shields. It's an automatic Scion setup the second they have 3 shields. The thing is, Elf gives you 2 overtimes if they have even 1 shield. So I feel like that's why this isn't that good. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of B tier. But honestly, maybe you could consider that if there's some sort of shield heavy meta where you want every option under the sun. Definitely doesn't compare to other options that you get for weaving into, you know, like weaving into Storm as a fire is way better. Y'all, I will be making another video on all of the remaining spells. That is right. This is just a spell fusion tier list. But if this video does well, I will go through all of the 4, you know, like mono fusion and spellman pat spells, a Selenopolis spell. But this is a pretty decent tier list in my opinion. It shows that actually, for the most part, in my opinion, there's a lot of useful spells. A lot of them aren't, but that doesn't mean that this is like, you know, a bad update in terms of usable spells. Drop a like if you enjoyed content like this. Maybe I'll do more tier lists like this with other spells. I don't know. I guess I'll do it with Selenopolis if y'all want. Took a lot of effort, y'all. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this. You know, leave a sub if you're new. As always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah, y'all.